Yeah, so protecting your APIs and applications with the Nordic e-IDs. I'm Erik Wahlstro. I work as a technology strategist at Nexus. Nexus is a Swedish company. Our headquarters is just 2 blocks away from here, down by the waterside in Marievik. We mainly develop software products like PKI, identity and access management, authentication products, and our customers are mainly banks, municipalities, and large enterprises. As I said, Nordic e-IDs is today's topics, and how are you protecting your APIs and your applications using the Nordic e-IDs? It's a pretty exciting topic right now because the Swedish Datainspektionen, or the Swedish Data Inspection Board, as it's called, actually struck down a couple of weeks ago, I think, saying that the mobile bank applications isn't really up to standards. They need to authenticate in a better way to give access to banking information. So it's a lot of talk about e-IDs at the moment, and I'm going to first talk quickly what is an e-ID, then what Nordic e-IDs does they exist. It's like a jungle out there. And then we're going to talk about 3 ways that you could protect your APIs, because there are different versions of e-IDs. So 3 alternatives you can have a closer look at to solve your needs. So an e-ID is your digital passport. You use it to authenticate and to digital sign documents. It's either issued by a government or trusted by government. That means that there can be like a bunch of different companies in the country that issue e-IDs, but the governments and their like tax systems trust those e-IDs. A signature with a digital e-ID is legally binding in the same way as like you have a document that you sign with pen. It has the same value. And as I said, it is kind of a jungle. There's 2 major wrong things with this picture. Gotland, where I'm from, is totally deformed. It's much more beautiful than that. And Iceland is freakishly big, actually. But I have to move it around a bit. We actually were at Iceland 3 weeks ago with Nexus. Beautiful place. Do not go on whale safari. They do not have whales. They have waves. Not a perfect morning, I might say. But they do have an e-ID, and we at Nexus delivers that. It's like a smart card-based thing. Denmark has actually 3 e-IDs at the moment. One is called NetID, but that is phasing out. They have something called NemID that's issued by the government. Norway, the leader of the pack with 4 different e-IDs. Actually, there are more e-IDs all over the place here, but 4 big ones. Min-ID is issued by the government, but BankID is the largest one. Sweden currently have 3 big vendors, issuers of e-IDs, but Nordea is actually this month merging to BankID, so it will only be 2 big ones. Finland is a bit of an odd bird in this scenario. They have Fin-ID, which is issued by the government, but it's not so widely used, and I think the main reason of that is that the end user have to pay for their e-IDs, and that business model doesn't really help with the adoption. So instead they use something called 2Pass, and 2Pass is actually done by their banks, and it's not built in the same way as the other e-IDs. It's like a federation thing going. Do I have a question?
Which is the 3rd vendor in Sweden?
This is BankID, Nordea, and this is Telia. Yeah. And 2Pass is kind of like a homebrew federation thing going. But the interesting thing with 2Pass is that it's widely deployed and used like everywhere, and that's pretty interesting because it's not as secure as the other ones. You cannot really sign a document in the same way as you can with other e-IDs, but simplicity wins in a lot of cases. So a short rundown on what different types of e-ID that exist. First, you have like a smart card-based e-ID. You carry the e-ID with you all the time. It's a really secure thing, but on the other hand, you have like requirements on hardware. You have to have some software installed on your computer. You have to have applets or ActX components. It's a bit of a hassle to get it working, but it's really secure. And another way to do it is to have some kind of software-based one-time passwords. You have like a USB dongle or maybe a scratch card that you can get one-time passwords from. And that's much more easier for the end user, but the e-IDs are actually stored on servers centrally somewhere. And some security experts like that and some don't. NSA probably likes that, but I'm not sure about NemID, but some of these uses applets to add security to this, so it still has some kind of some requirements on the specific devices. I talked about Tupas. It's their own thing, some kind of homebrew federation thing, and then we have like the current poster child of e-IDs. Swedish BankID just released an API-based version. It's probably what you guys have been screaming for quite some time. Norway BankID is also doing something like that also, but in general, it's a moving target. e-IDs pop up and they merge with each other, and what's next is that Swedish BankID is moving to the same platform as their mobile BankID, so it's going to be API-based, new clients. At the same time, Sweden is moving to something called e-ID2, which is a SAML-based federation. So it's you always authenticate and sign at your issuer. So if BankID issued your certificate, you always authenticate at the BankID servers. And that's actually supported by the government. So it's currently a battle going on between BankID and e-ID2. But e-ID2 has the government in their back, so let's see what happens. Then come the fun part, I guess. When I'm talking about protecting APIs, I talk about web-based APIs. I guess that's what this conference is mostly all about. If you have like libraries and DLL files that you want to protect, this is not the session. On the other hand, if you want to go down that path, which you can do using buzzwords like PKCS11 and CSP. When you succeed with that, give me a call. We'll talk about a job, maybe. But today we're going to talk about web-based APIs. And we're going to make extensive use of protocol handlers. It's going to be a bit more technical this session than the earlier ones. You're probably familiar with protocol handlers. It's like you start other applications, so your iPhone application starts the mobile ID client, and it restarts your application again further on. So it's kind of crucial to get e-ID working. We're going to make extensive use of browsers and OAuth 2. I'm not going to talk in detail about OAuth 2, but stay in this room because it's going to be interesting security day with OAuth 2 and then OpenID Connect later on. It all ties together here. I'm going to talk about the OAuth 2 tokens, but it could actually be like anything. When you're authenticated with BankID, you can get like a web session. That's equally fine, but think of OAuth 2 when we talk about APIs. So the three alternatives that we're going to talk about is the poster child, Swedish Mobile BankID. You have an API. We're going to dig in deep on how that works with some fancy flows. OAuth 2 to authenticate using any other type of e-ID. How can you use this one to authenticate on your phone or on your laptop? And then the final one is like an emergency case, but I'm going to mention it briefly. It's a way to try to solve. You have your phone and you have your smart card. Doesn't really fit together. How will that work out? So a short thing to maybe solve that. So the dream scenario. or maybe the API-based scenario. At least we have a pretty stupid application here that we use at Nexus to demonstrate how you can bring identities to applications. The stupid thing about it is that all it can do is get the temperature at the office. I know that you guys are really interested in that. It's usually pretty warm. It's like a glass building, so it's really interesting stuff. And what we're going to do is like to access this protected API in our office when it's protected with the mobile bank ID. And the first thing mobile bank ID wants from you is the personnummer, as it's called, the national identification number. It's kind of like the social security number, not the same level of secrecy. It's not as secure, but it's probably going to be in a couple of years. But all this is done in your application. The user has to enter their personnummer to authenticate. What happens then is that your application sends it to your API, and then you do a protocol handler call, like start a bank ID client. And you send your application's listener, or the URL that's going to restart your application to the bank ID client. The user authenticates using a PIN, and when that's done, the mobile ID client will restart your application again. And as you can see, maybe not in the back, I guess, but it says that the temperature is 24 degrees, which is a lot. So, and it's Celsius, by the way. So this is the end user flow. But if we have a bit of a deep dive, and bear with me, it's going to be a lot of arrows, but we're going to dig deepest into this one. So you have the application, you have your API here, and you have bank ID servers. What you want to do is get some kind of token in your application, so you can use that to authenticate to your protected API. And the first thing the user does is send the personal number to your API. Your API then sends the personal number in an authenticate request to bank ID. And then it started to make like collect calls once every second, even faster than that. So it's like starting to ask in bank ID server like a madman, have the user authenticated? Have the user authenticated? And as we talked about earlier, your application started bank ID client, watch the logo, changed. Fancy. And the first thing bank ID does is ask the bank ID server, hey, do I have a new job that I can do, authenticate or sign something? And in this case we do, because we got it an authenticate request from here. And the user authenticates, and all of a sudden one of these collect calls get a response. Yeah, the user has authenticated. And bank ID client restarts your application. And the first thing your application does is ask, hey, do you have, did everything work out fine? Did the user authenticate correctly? And in this case, it did. So you will get some kind of token that you can use to access your protected API, telling the server, like, I'm authorized to look at this API and make calls, getting that important temperature. So that's like the first thing. It's the first alternative. Alternative 2 is more complex in the way that, what about all the other e-IDs? Those doesn't have an API as fancy as this one. Excuse me. And the other e-IDs is always constantly changing, as I said. New e-IDs comes up, and they're usually like built for web browsers. So this is actually my favorite alternative, because it's gonna give you the widest spread, and you don't have to care what's really happening, what e-IDs that you have to use. So in this case, we make extensive use of OAuth 2. As I said, stick in this room if you want to know more about that later on. in general, it's a way like to get a security token. If you get 2 tokens, that's good, because you got the refresh token that you can use later on. As I said, we're going to use OAuth 2 and a browser dance. A dance is always good, so we're going to do a browser dance, and with the help of OAuth 2, pop up a browser and let the user authenticate there. So, the temperature application, different alternative here in this case. And the first thing your application does when the user click get temperature, it's gonna start up your native browser on your phone, or in a lot of cases, even on your computer. And it's gonna ask for an OAuth, actually an OAuth code that you can later use to get some OAuth tokens. And it's saying that, hey, I'm the Nexus application. I want to ask the user if I am authorized to get the temperature. And what happens then is not really your headache. Because you pop up a browser. This is your application. This is a browser. So the browser does what it's good at. It can do redirects. If I'm on my laptop, it can have ActiveX components. Maybe not on this one, but it can have applets anyway. In this case, we're using a product of ours that does user authentication. And you can do a lot of different types of authentication, but you can also use an e-ID service. So like e-ID as a service thing. So your application doesn't really have to care. It's just waiting for that OAuth code. And you're going to hear more about this in next sessions, but it's like a question that the browser asks you. Do you really want to give access to that API? And you get that once you have authenticated with like any of the other e-IDs. And if the user clicks yes, in this case, we use that protocol handler again, restart your application, and you get the code that you can use to access the API and get that temperature. We're not going to go in such detail with this, but in this case, you have your application, and you have a web browser, any web browser, and you have your API down there. And your application asks, can I access the temperature in the office? And in this case, it doesn't have a token. So it's like, start a browser, and then any magic can happen. You don't really have to care. In this case, it uses an e-ID as a service here, and you don't really have to know about that. But when all this is done, your application is started and get the token that you can later use to access your APIs. Third and last one, the strange one, phone, smart card, doesn't work. So how do you solve that case? And this case is not the dream scenario. You're going to let the user do a lot of work. Maybe you will have even a sad user, because what you want to do is like activate your phone using a computer. So you have to have 2 devices. And we're going to like connect these 2 devices so that you actually authenticate on your computer on the behalf of your phone. And this is where that second token that I talked about, a refresh token in OAuth 2, becomes important. Because the user don't want to do this every time. They're like, if I have to use my computer every time, I'm going to use my computer, right? So I'm not going to use my phone then. So it's important that you get the refresh token. There is like business models here when it comes to e-IDs that doesn't allow refresh tokens. So as I said, this is like a special case. Bank ID in Sweden don't allow refresh tokens because it's like conflict with their business model in like every time you authenticate with Bank ID, they get a small amount of money. And if we issue a refresh token, we're not going to send those authentication requests to Bank ID, and they will not get any money. So there is a problem with some of the e-IDs. Here, Finland may be a good alternative. The user had to pay for the e-ID instead. is another business model that might in where you will get the refresh token that makes this flow better. Get temperature. In this case, all your application has to do is like tell the user to do some dirty work for you. Like go to this long URL, enter this OTP. So that's all your application has to do, and then it starts to ask your server in like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Have the user authenticated and said like this code in some kind of user interface? Back on my computer, my phone is still asking, are you done yet? I choose to authenticate with some kind of e-ID here. Pretty stupid example is actually mobile bank ID in this case, but it could be like a smart card authentication. But in the third step here, when the user has authenticated, he has to enter an OTP that you got from your phone. And when you have done that, you can like issue tokens to your phone that's constantly asking for them. And then you can use that to get the temperature, which is always 24 degrees. Yes, it is hard-coded. Doesn't have any logic at home. So that's 3 ways that you can use a wide range of e-IDs. Some final words. So users are pretty picky. 10 years ago, it kind of worked to have a smart card or a bank ID on file, for example, on your computer. But nowadays, people want to use their iPads. They want to use their Android phones. It's kind of like a moving target with what you want to support. And the user wants to decide what they're using and what type of e-ID you're using. And you have to all of a sudden like support every device, every e-ID. And the second flow that I talked about, used OAuth 2, is gonna let some server, some browser do all the dirty work, and you can do what you does best instead. As I said, refresh tokens, good stuff, but as I said, bank ID doesn't allow it, which make the third flow that I talked about with like 2 devices pretty unusable. So the user doesn't really like it if it doesn't get a refresh token. There's a new standard that's in the working called web crypto, which is going to like bring a lot of authentication and signing into web browsers. And do not hold your breath, because it's still a long way there, but it's going to be pretty interesting what this web crypto standard can do to the e-ID market. So if you have any questions about e-IDs, or tomorrow I'm going to talk about SCIM, which is a standard that sends identity data to different systems. Send me an email or tweet. And thank you.
Questions for Erik? Yep. Paul?
Erik, the flow at the end, the 2 device flow,
Yeah.
you had the binding happen by the user entering the OTP into the PC.
Yeah, doing the dirty work here.
Right. So the user did the dirty work. Is it possible to go in the other direction? I don't know, have a QR code on the PC interface and minimize the dirty work by having the user scan that on their phone?
Sure, and there is also other ways, like you can like log in into both places and like having some kind of notification in like, by the way, I see that you're trying to authenticate in a secure way on this phone. So there's a lot of ways that you connect those 2 devices. So yeah, sure, QR codes are easier for the end user. So.
Thanks. Yep.
Other questions?
I think there's some work going on, something coming from e-Legitimationsnämnden now, an identity federation. Does that impact what you're saying at all?
Yeah, sure. So that is the e-ID 2 thing that's going on. And that is started by e-Legitimationsnämnden, as I said. And it's a SAML-based federation, and it's kind of like a strange signing flow where you sign everything on server and use a special standard to authenticate to sign stuff. And the second alternative with where you let the user pop up a browser, that's going to be even more crucial, because that way you can like use any e-ID issuer that's in the SAML federation. And that's happening now. So the standards are there. There is something called testbädden in Sweden, where there are a lot of implementations, and both identity providers and service providers are trying to interop with each other. So, yeah. Thanks.
How does that e-ID2 spec compare to what's going on in Finland, which you said was kind of a weird federation sort of thing?
Yeah, the Finnish one is like their total own thing. They do like post to different servers, and they take some arguments and do some hashing of it. It's not a digital signature or anything. It's like an HMAC going on there. The concepts are the same, like you always authenticate at your bank that issued the e-ID, but the standards are totally different. So Typas is definitely its own thing. And Finland is actually working on a third thing right now, where you're using your phones and a SIM card on your phone that should have your e-ID. So yeah, a lot of things happening there also.
More questions? Okay, well, we can grab Erik during one of the breaks, but thanks.
Thanks.